Hey guys, Jonno Proudfoot here, and I'm about to tell you we're going to do a deep dive into the Banting and Keto red list and the light red list. But before I do that, I just want to give you a brief intro to the keto food list. So in a previous video, I explained the basic 7 principles behind the keto list or the Banting food list is that they are low carb, they are sugar-free, gluten-free. We want to avoid seed oils. And then the 3 extra items are level of processing, sneakiness. So like there are some ingredients that have health implications that might not necessarily be related to seed oils or carb content. And finally, practicality. So even though this is a low carb item, or even though this is a high carb item, is it practical to put it on this list? So those are the 7 layers or the 7 principles that we use to decide which list an ingredient goes on. Carb count, sugar content, gluten content, seed oil content, or seed oils at all, level of processing, health impact or sneakiness, like dairy or coffee, and then practicality. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to show you what the keto foods look like, and then we're going to go through them. So first, these are the keto food lists, and this is an A4. If you click, I'm going to add a link into the comments. If you click on that link, you can download them in this exact pack, and you will have a bigger 2 A4 sheets as well that you can print and stick together, so the print's slightly bigger. So on one page, there's the green and orange list, and then on the next page, there's the light red list, and some notes on the side here where you can make notes about extra ingredients that you add. So in this, like I said, in this one, we're going to go through the light red list and the red list. The first point I wanted to clarify was, what is the difference between the red list and the light red list, and why do they even exist? So after about 3 or 4 years of helping people adapt to the Banting diet, what we had was a whole bunch of people who wanted to know, like, what do we eat if we don't necessarily want to keep our carb count low, but we still want to be like healthier? And obviously for people who want to be ketogenic or who want to reverse their diabetes, they need to keep their carbs super low. So they always need to stick to the orange list and the green list. And then there were people who said, yeah, but you know, we want to be in on this whole like Banting movement, but we don't necessarily want to keep our carbs low. And they said, isn't there like an area between orange and red where there are foods that we can eat that are like less unhealthy? So we looked at the red list and realized, actually, you know, it is better to eat like gluten-free bread than it is to eat normal bread. And it is better to have a Banting dessert than it is to have a normal dessert. But it's still worse to have a Banting dessert than it is to have, you know, an apple, for instance. So there was this area that sat between orange and red, and that area is the light red list. So what you will find on the light red list is high carb foods that are gluten-free and I wouldn't say healthier than the red list, but less unhealthy than the red list. So that's the difference between light red and red. And now I want to give a little bit of a deep dive into the red list. So a lot of people ask a lot of questions about this list, and they wonder like why certain things are on the list. So I think under general, it's pretty self-explanatory. We want to stay away from sugary condiments, any junk food, crisps, and any food with added sugar. And I don't think that's a mystery to anyone. When it comes to sweet things, a lot of people who are just entering into this health environment, you know, they've never really looked at their health, they've never concentrated on what they're eating, or they've never really read labels. There are a lot of like health messages that go out there on especially sweeteners that could lead someone to believe that they're eating something healthy when it's not. And the classics are agave nectar and coconut blossom sugar. So the question you have to ask yourself is this food that I eat going to increase my blood sugar? And is it going to stimulate an insulin response? Because if it is, then that is a sugar. So something that might not stimulate an insulin response is like aspartame, which is on the red list for another reason. But so even if it isn't called sugar and it's promoted as a health product, the chances are if it has sucrose, fructose, or glucose in it, I mean, if it has those three in it, it's definitely going to push up your blood sugar and be bad for you. And so for that reason, they're all on the red list. I mean, honey technically should be on the red list as well, but there's debate internally about whether it's red or light red. But remember, light red is also super high carb. So whether it's a sugar on the light red list or the red list, it's not, it's neither here nor there. So very important to remember that like health marketed sugars are still sugars and they need to be avoided. And then obviously all the other stuff, canned fruit, mass produced artificial sweeteners, all very naughty. Okay. Then foods containing gluten. Banting is a gluten-free diet. That is critical to remember. Oats, they contain gluten, most oats, instant oats, jungle oats, all different types of oats contain gluten, except for the expensive steel-cut gluten-free oats. So there is like one type of oats you can get that doesn't contain gluten. That's still high in carbohydrate, and you should still avoid eating it. But that we put on our light red list. And unfortunately, you can't see it here, but oats would be sitting there right underneath matzo and above orzo. So all grains, couscous, durum, bulgur, all of them contain gluten, or all the grains that contain gluten, they are red listed and they need to be avoided. And that is even though these grains are high carb, the gluten needs to be avoided for a totally different reason than like the reason you would want to avoid a high carb food, because gluten is connected to gut permeability, and what gluten can do is trigger a sort of separation of your gut lining cells. And what that does is allows sort of everything that's in your gut into your bloodstream, and then you end up marinating your whole body in the contents of your stomach. And that's what leads to all of the neurological issues and joint issues that Dr. Perlmutter talks about in Grain Brain, and William Davis talks about in Wheat Belly. So very important. Gluten is not the same as a carb. Gluten has a completely different impact on the gut, and that's why it is on the red list. So what I'm saying there is don't just watch your carb count, because there's more to health than carb count. Okay. Other grain products. So obviously it goes without saying that anything with gluten in it is on the red list, but we just, for extra clarity, added grain products here. So anything that is breaded or battered, your fish goujons that are deep fried and battered, your chicken nuggets, all of those things that have like flour or grain or breadcrumbs on them, you got to stay away from those. Breakfast cereals, even though they're so innocent and tiny in this little list, it's almost like breakfast cereals should have like their own poster, not even lists, because breakfast cereal is like giving your children a gluten and sugar injection in the morning and telling them to go and like use their brain, and they're going to be like, high on the sugar. So we want to stay with breakfast cereals, and then obviously all crackers, which would fit under a bread product as well. Then energy drinks, commercial fruit juices, iced teas, and milkshakes. So most of those are there because of their sugar, but it's important to note that there are a few energy drinks that are marketed as organic. Okay. Now, like Schecter's Organic Energy, I think, is one of them. Now, if you are drinking an organic energy drink, that's really great for you. But if it contains sugar or honey or agave nectar or organic sugar or, regenerative agriculture sugar, it is sugar, and sugar is sugar, and you should still stay away from that. The other thing that we say is that even if it's a sugar-free soft drink, it's made in a factory, and that's where level of processing fits in. And when it comes to sneakiness, which is the sixth factor of the list, sneakiness is really important because sweet foods drive appetite. So even if you are having a sugar-free fizzy drink, it's driving appetite. And so sure, a sugar-free drink is better to drink than a sugar drink, but it is still driving appetite, and ultimately we want to get rid of that sweetness. Okay, now when it comes to fats, according to the Banting and Keto science, we want to avoid as many polyunsaturated fatty acids as possible, and we want to keep our omega-6s low, not because they should be super low, but because our modern diet is so high in omega-6s that it's put us out of balance, and we should have an equal ratio of omega-3 and omega-6. And all of these seed oils are, well, firstly, they're unstable and they're processed and they go rancid quickly, which has a whole lot of health implications. The other reason is that they push our omega-6, omega-3 balance out of sync, and that's linked to inflammation and a whole lot of other stuff. So we want to avoid seed oils. And then obviously, like proteins, we want to avoid highly processed sausages and bologna. Now, the only extra thing I want to add to this under the protein side is that we do recommend you should eat the best quality meat or protein that you can afford. Now, obviously, the gold standard would be like regenerative agriculture, beef and chickens that were fed on vegetables that were grown in chicken poo, so that we're completing the cycle. But everyone has a budget and everyone has a lifestyle. And so if you are trying to improve your health, the best thing you can do is remove sugar and carbs. And eventually, if you can get away from your polony and Viennas, do it as fast as you can. But when it comes to the protein, it's very important that we're not saying, you being a bad banter if you can only afford protein, because eating polony and a Vienna is definitely going to be healthier than eating like pup and bread. So you've got to do what works for you. Okay. The last thing I want to say before tapping out is, if you go through the light red list, these are foods that are still bad for you. They are not good for you, and they are unnecessary calories, but they are less bad for you than the complete red list. So alcoholic beverages, I mean, if I was being a health purist, I would say you should take alcohol out of the picture. I don't drink, but that's tough to sell, and for many people, alcohol actually helps mental health. Sometimes they like to have a drink at the end of the week or at the end of a big day, and that's absolutely fine. If you can pick up a drink and put it down and carry on with your life, then please do that. There is science to suggest that one glass of red wine, every so often is good for you. So fruit and yogurt smoothies, and then vegetable juices, so pressed vegetable juices. They were previously seen as healthy, like you could go on an only juice diet. In the Banting and Keto universe, where we're trying to lower your insulin and lower your blood sugar, these will still increase your blood sugar and raise your insulin. So they're not a good idea. But like I said, if you are not insulin resistant and you love a veggie juice, have a veggie juice. Then under treats and chocolate, all of these so-called healthy sugars are still sugar. Sugar-free ice cream is still sweet, and Banting baked goods are light red. So these are all foods that you should have hardly ever. Okay, because they're sweet, they stimulate your appetite, etc. Dates, honey, dried fruit, these are all very high in sugar. And then gluten-free grains. So again, these are still grains, they're still high in carb, but they are gluten-free, and you can have these if you are not insulin resistant. And then finally, on the flours front, these are just flours made of a lot of the grains above and sweeteners. Finally, the artificial sweeteners, which we are more okay with, are erythritol, xylitol, isomalt stevia, and sucralose. These are non-nutritive sweeteners, and many people disagree about which sweeteners are okay and not okay. In my opinion, they're still processed, a lot of them, and they are it's like if you give a heroin addict methadone while they're coming off, that's good, but methadone is not a sustainable drug to keep using for the rest of your life. So we believe you should use sweeteners as like a weaning tool to come off the sweetness, but ultimately you should adjust to a life with less sweetness, and then get your sweetness from like a real apple every now and then, or a delicious cherry, or a plum. There was one question that came up: doesn't drinking diet sodas raise your insulin? Yes, for some, diet soda does raise your insulin, but for others it does. It has absolutely no impact. And then when it comes to salamis and bacon, those are what we call like semi-processed. So a bologna is like highly processed. It's got a filling, a filler in it, and often they put grains and all kinds of like ground down bone or mechanically deboned meat and stuff into them. And so that's what we would say is not a real food. Whereas when it comes to salami, there are also two types of salami. There's salami that is cured naturally and dried naturally. And then there's salami that is almost like bleached and chemically accelerated in its fermentation process. So a real traditionally made salami actually ferments and is cured naturally with its own bacteria. And so that is a good that is good food to eat, whereas other salamis are often accelerated. So there's some gray there, and it depends which one you're having. But that's it. That's my intro to the Banting red and let me get my mouse here, to the red list and a breakdown of each category. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments below, and our support team will get back to you. And then I'm going to pop a link onto this feed now, so you can go and download your copy of the Banting and Keto food lists. Have a lovely weekend. I'll check you later.